Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get some people on stage here. Hopefully, everyone can hear me.
I can hear you.
Good. If we see anybody that I miss, let me know as they come in. Okay, cool. Um, Thanks to everybody for attending once again. We've got our bi-weekly meeting just to go over status, provide an update to the community, and answer any questions that folks have. Typically, how we have operated these meetings in the past is focusing on any broad technical steering committee updates, and then kind of diving into the status of individual working group projects. We currently have two projects that are in progress, uh, effectively owned by two different working groups, one a machine learning working group and the other the data working group, both with the ultimate goal of supporting the development of a new model. A lot of the decisions that we have discussed over the past few weeks and months have been open conversations around how we approach the structure of that model, what the goals of that model are, effectively how we are thinking about building something that is not just not just another model, but one that actually solves some of the problems that are being found in applied use cases, something that is more useful to the community. And again, one that is fully open and transparent in the process of development. We've got a lot of things that are moving. It is a very complicated process. I think at the end of the day, we are trying to be as open as we can about the process while also recognizing that this is a pretty complicated area from a legal perspective and ultimately trying to make sure that we do this the right way that keeps us going as an organization and continues to allow us to support the development of open models. One thing that I'll call out just as a point of visibility, the Technical Steering Committee has been discussing with the Linux Foundation moving into the Linux Foundation Data and AI organization. That organization is effectively a more well-resourced and kind of organized group and collection of a broad group of projects that are all related to data set management, and AI. So we're a natural fit for that group. There's a generative AI commons organization underneath that group that we're looking at kind of moving the OMI under. There's not really a whole lot for the community to really worry about or be concerned about. It's mostly just a logistical thing and kind of provides better resources for the organization as we evaluate that. So that proposal I think is coming up in early October. We'll keep everybody updated. Either way, we're under the Linux Foundation. This is really just kind of like logistics underneath where we sit in that org. Um, so that's all I had from a TSC updates. We'll go ahead and move into the machine learning working group. There's been some active development in the repository. If you look at the training pipeline and data pipeline repositories on GitHub, you'll see activity there for both of those projects. The ML working group has been, I would say, a little bit set back. There were just some logistical issues with Comfy. He's recently moved and had some vacationing, I believe. I think he climbed Mount Fuji recently, which is super cool. But ultimately, that has just been a process that we've got a little bit more work to do on with the development of the training pipeline. Fortunately, Alessio, one of the members of the machine learning working group, pushed up basically a raw, rough draft of a pipeline given the architecture that we've discussed previously. The architecture that has been discussed and currently being working or is currently being worked through, just to give everyone visibility, because I know that we've discussed this in the past, but I will continue to repeat the current ideation on that so that people have visibility, because I've seen questions in the on topic channel The idea is for a DIT or transformer based model, similar to kind of some of the popular ones that are out now, a T5 encoder, potentially a T5XL, with an additional layer between the encoder and the model to allow for trainable uh, text encoding. It's effectively just a way to allow for easier way of training new concepts into the model and into the text encoder itself. The other piece that is being explored is baking the control capabilities directly into the pre-trained model. Effectively, what this would allow for is for controllability out of the box, obviously, but also during fine tuning, really kind of like baked in way of continuing to develop the controls in such a way that they have domain context. I think one of the things that users will notice if you're using control nets, if you use two different canny models, for example, is that the style and the color choices and a lot of what is actually going to result in the output image is influenced heavily by those control models themselves. And what those control models were trained on is kind of embedding in some amount of domain knowledge ultimately in the resulting output. And so by allowing that to be trainable during the fine tuning process, you're actually making the controllability something that is domain aligned or concept aligned when you fine tune and train it. And that's ultimately the goal of that piece. So I don't have any other updates there. The other piece that we'll maybe raise and kind of open some discussion up around is the standards conversation, which has continued to develop. I think the um, one recent conversation that has been interesting that I think is maybe worth talking about is the emergence of quantization in the image generation space. I know that Vlad is here from the SD Next team. Him and I have had some conversations around this. I don't know if anyone else on the call wants to just share perspectives on quantization formats. I think most everyone who's building an application layer or training tool is probably uh, beat their head a little bit against the emergence of all of these different formats. But I'm curious if anyone has any comments or wants to share those on the call. Vlad, Wolfgang, maybe you all are the most
Yeah,
appropriate people.
sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Issues with the microphone.
You're good.
I hope you can hear me now.
We can.
Okay, so yeah, with the Flux, we saw a lot of different quantization options happening, and it's really fragmenting the marketplace. Basically, it's really getting hard to use and hard to support all the different quantizations, especially when you look at loading LoRa's and anything additional that actually modifies the model. So I think we need to come up with a standard which quantizations do we want to support out of the box. I
Yeah.
think that would be critical for the success of the OMI model. The quantizations have really major benefit. We don't want to not have them, but we do have to avoid the Wild West.
Yeah, and I think the issue comes into play, like you said, with LoRa's, especially because patching the different quantization formats effectively requires, we've been looking at this with the Invoke implementation, and I think the way that we're looking at it, you effectively either have to write patching code for every single type of quantization, or do some other kind of like sidecar implementation that impacts performance. Ultimately, I think our approach is going to be trying to make sure that you can use most of the LoRa's that are out right now in a sidecar fashion, and then build the patching code for the ones that are most effectively, I think, supported by the community. Wolfgang, I'm curious, since you all are at the center of the marketplace a bit on the model side, have you all seen any, I would say, movement there on a specific format, or are you all thinking about quantization formats given the Civitai trainer? Maybe you all can just share your current perspectives on the quantization formats and what's happening there.
Yeah, we're trying our best to. We have a couple of different like generation pipelines where users can kind of plug and play. So it's pretty flexible on our side. I know we're really interested right now in the traction that GGUF has gotten,
Yeah,
um, especially because of how much it's used in language modeling. So that's something that we're keeping our eye on over at Civitai. But I agree with Vlad. I think that as we see more and more models starting to um, splinter, I think a big part of the OMI's like near-term goals once we start training models is to see, is there something that kind of stands out with the models that we are training, and then how can we make it as um, user friendly and user applicable as possible.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. GGUF is something that we're looking at as well. I think one of the things that Vlad mentioned was um, right now there's kind of like the way to use those models is to pull in the kind of like GGML execution engine or do some work in PyTorch to effectively leverage it. I think there might be an opportunity there to standardize something with the OMI and effectively provide that GGUF support. And I think we could potentially push the GGUF format as a standard if we make it really easy for people to develop models using that and obviously run inference on those models. Um, is there another format that stands out that we should potentially be considering pushing, or is GGUF something that is, is this something that we want to maybe kind of like evaluate? And I do
Yeah,
see
I,
it.
I think it's
Good.
yeah, I think at this stage it's best to just kind of evaluate because um, quantization is really just kind of taking off, and in our back end, people are experimenting with it, but for the most part, I think that there's not really a clear winner on the Civitai side. So um, I think again, GGUF is really interesting because um, it has a lot of tested capabilities in the language modeling space, but I am kind of like, I think what you're getting at, right, is that there's also some weird dependencies, and
Yeah.
um, it'll be interesting to see if we can't improve that. I also know that there's quite a lot of people over at Hugging Face who have a lot of deep experience with GGUF and how to actually like streamline that process. So I'm wondering if we couldn't also learn from some of the stuff that they've done.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. I mean, I think one thing that I would propose is that, if not today, in the near term, that the OMI advocates for and kind of pushes for members to adopt kind of one as the, let's say, preferred. I don't think that we can necessarily dictate, but I do think that we can guide and nudge with defaults to a certain format being the more commonly used, I think is maybe what I can say. And I think that that ultimately will improve the experience for end users because they don't have to worry about different extensions, different formats, different applications handling models different ways. I think the more that we can really streamline this, the better it is for the broader ecosystem. Um, so I think it's fair to say that we're still in an evaluation phase, but I do think we probably need to make some decisions on what we want to advocate for across members in the near term, just so that we can start making some moves in that direction. And I do think that given we've got both application layer and training layer folks involved, we've got Koya, we've got the One Trainer team, we've got Invoke, we've got Comfy, we've got Civitai. I think we've got a pretty decent chance of pushing this out. And with what Vlad and the SDNX team are doing, I think we've got a good coverage across most of the ways that people are deploying this today. So maybe this is just a continued agenda item for the next few meetings. We keep kind of tabs on what's emerging from a quantization perspective, and then use this as an opportunity to kind of like push off. There was a question that Mal put in the chat around quantization. This discussion about quantization, does that mean it's more likely that OMI will make a big primary model similar to Flux, which is then quantized, as opposed to producing a spread of different model sizes? Seems like training one larger model would be simpler. I think that it certainly factors into how the OMI approaches model development. I think we're learning with Flux, how does the ecosystem digest a large model? What is what are the pros and cons of that, and is quantization an effective way of developing that? I think the training piece is probably a function here as well. You kind of really want, I think, most of the training layer to happen on the core model and then quantize that down. That's really what you want to see. And so I think that that's a function of the model development and the ultimate size of it. But I think this conversation around quantization is really more around how can the OMI support the open model ecosystem? How can we bring together all of the tools to make the ecosystem more successful overall and more integrated, whether that's an OMI developed model or just the model that is actively supported in the community. I think the OMI wants to support making things better. And so the discussion around quantization, I think, largely is focused on Flux right now, but it will function as a discussion point going into the OMI developed model as well. Um, Cool. Um, I'm not sure. There's a couple of other questions. I don't have enough context around the question around LoRa compatibility, but if you can provide some more context there, we can try to answer that. Um, Standards development has continued. I know that the One Trainer team has put up a couple of proposal documents inside of the repo around the model standards. That, again, for context, is really more of like how do we communicate model metadata and things like what trigger words are in the model, what layers are affected, what is the the context of what's inside of a singular packaged file. And I think this is kind of especially relevant with what we've seen with Flux. So would encourage folks to continue to look at that as that develops. We've got an ongoing thread, somewhat related to quantization, but I think is ultimately a little bit tangential. Um, I don't think there are any other agenda points. Latent Explorer, I don't know if there's anything you want to update on the HDR side. I know that the data team has been playing around with some ideas on how to synthetically create HDR data. I know Vlad came up with a really cool idea for doing that. Just for context for the community, there's been some discussion around HDR and HDR VAE. One of the data working group items has been how do we collect enough HDR data to do this? And I'll give credit to Vlad for coming up with a cool idea that leverages some of the mechanics of the diffusion process to kind of create a synthetic HDR pipeline. So that's something that's actively being worked on. But Latent Explorer, are there any other updates you want to like bring up right now?
Yeah, I have a little bit of an update. I think I might have mentioned it in our private ML group already, but I did move over to the Academy color encoding system. So now we're on in that color space instead. I've just been iterating on the architecture, trying out some different things. I'm been currently messing around with hierarchical VAs for higher compression ratios. Um, Everything's going really good. I've been switching the code over to PyTorch Lightning. I'm not sure if that's what y'all are wanting to use for distributed training, but I know PyTorch Lightning has the ability to train on multiple GPUs. And that's really about it currently. So.
Okay. No, that's a good update. I think it's good to hear things are going well. Any requests from the team? Anything else you need?
Uh, Mostly just the data,
Yeah.
but I know y'all are hard at work at that. So.
Yeah, I think there's also been a conversation around how the community can get involved here, which
Mm-hmm.
might be worth just raising up on the call. If there's interest, we think that there's probably an easy way for people to capture a lot of good data using their phones. And this was HDR data. If you transition your phone to like taking raw images, you actually capture decent HDR data that way. Phone quality images are fine. It's really a lot about capturing the just core image itself and the data around it and processing that through the VAE. So if people are interested in that, if there's a lot of interest, we can open up a way for the community to contribute those images. Effectively, it just means walk around with your phone, take a couple 100,000 pictures, not hundreds of thousands, but a couple hundred, 2,000 images. Maybe if you're ambitious, you can do 100,000, and then contribute those to the HDR data set. And if we get enough people doing that, I think we've got a really healthy data set. And the benefit of doing it that way with the community is that ultimately that can be open data set without any real issues at all around how that data set was aggregated. It could be a very valuable asset for the community. So we'll just raise that up. Please send a note in the on topic channel or in comments on the recording that we post to YouTube for this if you're interested in that, and we can coordinate that. Awesome. Latent Explorer, thanks for the update. I'll transition now to the data working group for anyone who wants to share updates on that side. If there's anything that you need from us or any questions that you have, whatever discussion points y'all have, the floor is yours.
I can go first then.
Cool.
So, as mentioned, we're trying to get more HDR data for this HDR data set. So Temporium and I have both been off doing the phone quest, trying to gather as much interesting, unique data as we can there. But as you mentioned, we only have so many devices among ourselves, so more interesting metadata would be good from the community in that sense. There has been some work kind of preparing for that. So if we get community interest, it's aligned with our data pipeline and UI goals anyways. So we're working on the assumption that this will happen, and this will be the first kind of test of that process. So we've got a couple items that we need to work through, like adding a EULA or that kind of thing from the Linux Foundation to the site, and we're working with we're going to be working with a DevOps person from Civitai for the actual hosting of it at this point. So that's discussions going to be happening soon on just where to host this actual site to collect this kind of data, and will later be used for other aspects of the data collection pipeline. We've got a couple people working on things there. Fern has created the Docker image for our UI this week, which we'll use to kind of push that up in a containerized way. And then otherwise, this is after we get that sorted, we'll make that more public. I did see, as a separate topic, someone had asked about the initial 100,000 training testing data set and when we'd make that available. That is actually available on the Open Model Initiative section of Hugging Face. Anything that we are able to host publicly, such as URLs, will be in that location. So if you, I don't remember who had asked for that, but just a note, you can go find that. We can post a link after as well.
Yeah, I'll post the Hugging Face link in the chat for folks as well.
And as mentioned, Vlad created this HDR image generation technique to create synthetic HDR images. So we're just trying to get that optimized up and running so we can start creating more mass images with that. Additionally, I did have a question on that for Vlad or you, Ken, I'm not sure, but that's currently in Vlad's separate repo. I didn't know if we want to bring that into an OMI repo, either the data repo or a new repo, or where that would make sense.
For the HDR pipeline?
For the HDR image generation script.
I think it could
Yeah,
be in the data repo if Vlad is open to contributing that. I think
no,
it's
absolutely,
useful.
absolutely. I'm willing to transfer the ownership. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, if you want to put that as a data pipeline utility, like HDR script or HDR dataset script, I think that's another way that the community could help as well. If they want to run that script, they can generate that synthetic HDR data and contribute that once we get the site up. So I think there's a lot of ways for the community to get involved and help out with a lot of this.
Sounds good. So yeah, we can get that moved into the data pipeline repository. Lastly, just a small note, since we're always trying to evaluate the best VLMs for annotations, we've noted that Mixtral model has come out. Byrne from our side was going to be testing that, but we're waiting for the inference code to be available as well, which they'll make available in the coming days, just to see if that will be good for some of our annotation efforts in the future. I
Yeah, that'd be
think
cool.
that's all I have from my side.
Do we have context? I'm just curious. I haven't looked at Pixtral deeply. Do we know how much compute is needed to run the Pixtral model? I think it's a 12 billion parameter model, right?
Yeah, it's a 12B model. I don't know what that works out to requiring.
Because it could be interesting depending on like compute needs. Uh, if it doesn't take an insane amount, I think we could look at community captioning support there as well, which is just another way of getting involved and supporting. I imagine it probably requires more than most consumer cards, but people might have access to maybe some more like workstation type cards if they're involved and engaged in like fine tuning and training. So um, yeah, I think that all makes sense. Model selection for the captioning piece, I think, is ultimately going to. I know that we've kind of discussed this already, but one thing that I've noticed with Flux specifically is it almost requires that kind of like long chat GPT-esque prompt. I think our captioning strategy should overcome some of that, but I do think that there's also kind of like there's the flavor of the captioning that comes out of these models, and that almost becomes the prompt, the prompt flavor of what it's expecting. So I'm just curious how we're going to be thinking about that. Do
Yeah.
we do you want to go into that a little bit at all?
So I know. Hi, Deborah. I know that we're looking at having multiple captions for each image, like short captions, long captions, different sources to kind of help counteract that. Um, so we're definitely not looking at captioning everything with one LLM, but
Yeah.
getting a bunch of different sources, so it is a lot more flexible.
Yeah, I think basically that we're going to be evaluating them. We might do different model for the long annotations versus the short ones. We might do a different model, or we're still haven't got a finalized, completely solid on how we're doing the tagging for them. For example, as the third type of annotation we want as our minimum standard. But then yeah, we will support additional annotations. It's like a list. So we could do 2 different VLMs if there are 2 that are competitive but have unique flavors, and then that gives us just additional annotations to train on. Help spread out that feel and not feel too much like you have to prompt like a specific VLM.
This image portrays. Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense. Cool. Any other updates from the data working group or anything else that folks have questions about or agenda items that haven't been discussed? All right.
Quick question. I was just wondering, how are we feeling on timelines still? Are we
Um,
still feeling like we're on track for end of the year, basically?
yeah, I think the question's really going to be how quickly we can turn around. I mean, if we look at the timeline here, um, I think if we get the model architecture settled in the next month and a half to 2 months, and that will require some amount of experimentation, testing, so on and so forth. Um, I think we can probably get an initial alpha version of the model out still by the end of the year. I think the 2 big milestone pieces, if we think about from a model training perspective, is getting the architecture code or the architecture and training code settled. So we know that we're going to do a control incorporated model, we know that we're going to do extra layers between the text encoder or not. Like those are still open questions on whether we can get the architecture really settled with that. If we can get that settled, the training code finalized, then it's just a matter of having the data ready and pulling the trigger on the actual training job. That's the point where we'll need to decide the actual size of the model. That's going to be kind of like the make or break moment where we say, okay, we've got the training code, we can make the decision, how big do we want this thing to be? I think we'll have some good information by then on what we've seen with Flux and how we want to distribute that. Ultimately, I think the data set is going to be the bigger piece there. Is do we have enough time to collect the data that we want to and pull that together into something that's usable? I think I'm optimistic given where we're at with the application that's been developed by the data working group and a lot of what we have started to develop and learn with that. But that's going to be kind of the timeline that we're looking at. Those are the two must-have milestones. I do think that the data ultimately is going to be a little bit downstream of the architecture question. So I think that's the big um, current focus area that we need to have is making sure that Comfy feels supported. If Comfy is not able to develop the code, then we're going to need to probably pull in willing members of the community that can help with that piece. I think Alessio put a good, solid first draft together. That's really more of like I would say the rough research type code, but we're going to need to really put that into a more formal engineering pipeline and get that into distributed training. So that's going to take a little bit more work to kind of finalize. And I think we also need to actually have a steward for the tests that we want to run. And so those are the big pieces, I think, and contingent factors for us getting something out by the end of the year. I'm optimistic that with the group that we've got and the level of community involvement that we're seeing, that we can get there. But certainly requires us to continue kind of pushing on those dimensions. Um, that sound right to everybody on the call as far as like what we need to be thinking about and focusing on?
Makes sense to me.
Cool.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Awesome. Well, I think we're making good progress as a group. I think we're continuing to see a lot of good things come out of the OMI, and we'll probably continue to see more progress in upcoming all hands. So with that, unless anyone else has any agenda items or questions, then we'll go ahead and call it and conclude the meeting for today. I've got a recording going. We'll get that up on YouTube in the next day or two and continue to push this thing forward. Thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you all at the next one.